water over it, you get coffee. Same principle with incinerator ash. If I take this cell phone, there are toxic metals in here. There may be brominated flame retardants and chlorinated plastics in here. And if I take this and chuck it in a landfill, it's going to be really hard. It's going to take a long time before I can breathe or drink or get any of the stuff from here into my body. But if I burn this, instantly 70% is in the air and made more toxic and more available to be inhaled. I also end up with toxic ash that has to go to a landfill. And when it does, the rainwater, just like coffee grounds, is going to pick up more of the stuff inside that phone that it will just roll out around the phone for the most part, but it's going to have a lot more opportunity to take toxic metals and carry them into the groundwater. You're also going to have things in there, like I mentioned, the bromine and chlorine, when I talked about things that could be ingredients in there. Those are halogens. I don't want to get too wonky and scientific on you, but if you remember chemistry class, there are noble gases on the end, and then one end from there are halogens, like bromine, fluorine, chlorine. They form very toxic chemicals when burned, like dioxins and furans. The rest of it, if you're lucky, is just forming acid gases like hydrochloric acid, which we operators are the hugest source of it in this area. Those don't exist yet in this phone or in other things you're throwing in the trash. The dioxins aren't already there. They're created primarily when you burn it. So you're increasing the toxicity, putting some of it in the air and a lot of it in the ash as well. And so, yes, landfills are terrible. I'm not promoting landfills, but I'm being honest about the fact that landfills are made worse when you put toxic ash in them. And we need to move away from landfills, but we especially need to move away from making things more toxic and available to the environment in any form, whether we're talking about the air or the land. Okay, I'll leave with that point. I've covered a lot of that. Okay, so in DC, I've been working on convincing Washington, DC City Council and their Department of Public Works to stop sending their trash to one of the biggest trash incinerators in the country. And we did a study a couple of years ago. I hired a published expert in this field. And the top and bottom ones are actually not part of the study. Those are other things we evaluated and found incinerators are worse on them too. But these other 10 criteria are the 10 that they looked at in a life cycle analysis, comparing burning DC's trash in a nearby giant incinerator, 17 miles from the district, versus trucking it 2 to 4 times as far to landfills. And we want to look at that trucking, especially because the city kept saying, well, the trucks are such a problem. Actually, we are so worried about the trucks that we're thinking of not even recycling and just throwing everything in one truck because trucks are such a big emitter of pollution. Turned out they were completely wrong on that, but that was their argument. So we hired this guy out of Washington State, and we looked at these facilities. So we looked at, pointer. Here's a pointer. Yay. So we looked at, from DC, bringing in trash to Covanta, Fairfax, 3,000 ton per day trash incinerator, 6 times as big as the one here, versus bringing it to King George landfill or any of these 3 landfills here, the ones where most of DC's waste goes if it's not going there. And here's what we found. First, we just plugged in our emissions data from the EPA. We found that in comparing it, they're one of the biggest polluters in the DC area. Number one, a lot of things, similar to here, where your trash incinerator is the biggest air polluter in Warren County. I won't get into all the assumptions.
Actually, it's in Washington County.
Washington County,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm getting that back. I knew I was going to
Okay.
screw that up,
No.
sorry. I'm still new to the area, forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we looked at this, we found that for nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks, the amount of pollution coming out, is this still working? No, okay. The yellow line is the incinerator. And the blue line is the landfill that's twice as far. The red line is the 3 landfills that are 4 times as far. Now, if trucking were a big deal, and trucks put out a lot of nitrogen oxides, but if it were a big deal, you would see a much bigger gap between driving twice and 4 times as far. The fact is that it's so dwarfed by the amount of nitrogen oxides kicked out by the incinerator itself that trucking is not the issue. And we looked at it over 20 and 100 years, mostly because of the global warming slide you'll see later. But for most of these 10 criteria, we found incinerators were worse. We found that for particulate matter, which trucking also kicks out a lot of, but again, almost no difference about them. More laser pointers, very cool. And the supply here. So again, no real difference in the trucking, even though diesel trucks kick a lot of particulate matter out, still far more from burning the trash. Toxic pollution, far more from that than landfills. And this doesn't even include the dioxin emissions because we didn't have good data on the landfills from this. So dioxins are way off the scale in terms of how toxic they are compared to other things. And if you factor that in, this would be even more extreme. Now, here's one of the three where landfills are worse. And you'll notice on the three that landfills are worse on, the numbers are much smaller than the units for other things. So this is the subset that causes cancer versus toxic things in general, where you see we're at like 150 pounds per ton of waste versus about 1 or a fraction of 1. So it is worse on that one. It's about the same on eutrophication, like nitrogen type of chemicals. Acid gases, incinerators come out worse again. Pesticide-like chemicals, landfills are worse, but it's like 0.00 or something, so we're not fretting over that as much. Ozone depletion, same thing, 0.00 something, but you don't get that out of incinerators. Smog though, much bigger numbers, incinerators, far worse. And global warming also, the biggest numbers, and incinerators are far worse. And so this is just to recap, on 6 out of 10 things, incinerators are worse even when you truck it 4 times as far to a landfill. And on 1, they're about tied. And on the 3 others, landfills are worse, but on small units on that one.
Question, the yellow line, is that over 100 years? Or is that 1 year?
That's a great question.
So you're comparing 1 year versus over 100 years,
No,
and it might not be accurate.
the reason why it didn't matter for the incinerators is because it's mostly just a function for the methane data on the global warming slide, and you don't get much methane out of incinerators, and so there wasn't a need to look at it. It came out about the same, so that's why we didn't do it that way.
You hear very positive reports of burning to electricity in Scandinavian countries. Are they doing it differently?
They're doing it a little bit differently, but not that it's a good thing. They're using it to heat buildings a lot more than we do, so they're relying on it so much that they have to import trash from other countries to keep heating their country because they haven't built alternative systems. So that's not a good thing, but that's different from most of our systems. They act as if their ash is just like going nowhere or something. They don't usually tell you that when they brag about Sweden being so wonderful that they're getting rid of their ash by dumping it on an island in Norway. So there's that. And even worse, in some cases, they're using it as road base, so they're exposing people more in their own country. So there are a lot of videos from Swedish public relations, from Copenhagen, there was a ski slope incinerator, and a lot of PR around it. It doesn't mean they're a good thing. They're not doing anything fundamentally different, just have better public relations for the most part.
I just want to make a point about landfills. We don't have any household hazardous waste collection in Washington County, and I don't know if Warren County is any better. So people shouldn't be using pesticides, but they put pesticides, we put all kinds of things that never should be disposed of like that, because there's no other place to put it. So I would just argue that in terms of making landfills a little less toxic, we could enact policies that would give people some other places to put things so they do not get dumped on the land.
And we need to go to the top of the zero waste hierarchy, which we'll have soon on one of the slides, because sometimes they dispose of hazardous waste responsibly by burning it in Cohoes. They kill them. So hazardous waste collections don't mean that they're not burning it or doing something bad with it.
Yes.
When I was involved, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act was pretty much just come out, and there was a lot of talk about creating landfills that they were referring to as impermeable. And they had standards for how much could leak out of a landfill.
Yes.
And they attempted to cover them and make them into vaults. I wouldn't doubt that they've just forgotten all that and they don't do it anymore. But you talk about landfills as though if you put it there, it just gets up in the air anyway.
If you put things in landfills, some does get in the air because landfill gas, that's a serious problem at landfills, which is why we have to compost and keep the things that make the gas out of the landfill. I'm not again, I'm not advertising for landfills by pointing out that incinerators are even worse. And they also poison groundwater, and there was twice on the federal record, the Federal Register, so testimony before Congress, where EPA admitted that all landfill liners eventually leak. And you're right that they are supposed to be dry tomb style, they're supposed to have caps and keep the rainwater out, but they don't have canopies where they dump waste actively, and they often keep the open face open more, so the rainwater can get in more, because now they keep subsidizing landfill gas burning as renewable energy. And that means they want to make more gas so they can make more energy and get those renewable energy credits. And so that's
Ignoring the RCRA.
backwards.
The RCRA is just being kind of swept under the carpet.
Yeah, sometimes they're actively putting like leachate, recirculating it back into the landfill, trying to get liquids into the landfill on purpose so they can make more gas when the whole point of it was to be a dry tomb to keep liquids out of it. And so yeah, they are contradicting a lot of the initial points of RCRA. Yes, Pam?
That company that you had mentioned, the Cajon Mining, that would be NH County, would it be?
No, it'd be Norlite.
Norlite.
Yeah.
And what are they in, what are they?
They're a lightweight aggregate kiln. Do you want to describe them better? Or
Well,
explain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you heard of NH County? They are a scrap recycling center, they're
Mm.
quite a bit,
I've not heard of them, but we can talk later.
they're in the hose as well, and they
Okay.
just moved up here, 6 months. And, I thought that might be it, that you said hose. Thank you.
So quickly, for the record, Warren County does one hazardous waste collection a year that you have to pre-sign up for.
When, where?
You see it in the city, the information comes out in the Post-Star. I know we had both participated in it, myself 2 years ago, and her at least this last year.
Okay, I stand
And
corrected.
you have to go get an application at the county, or the Queensbury, town building.
I've never heard of needing to apply to go to one of these things. That's just even crazy.
Yeah, in Albany County, you need to get a reservation.
Okay, so let's move through this, and if you can remember your questions till the end, because otherwise we'll never get to that. All right, so there is an increasing trend where trash incinerators are actually catching on fire, and you might think, well, they're supposed to be having fires, right? But not this kind of fire. So this was in Norton, Virginia, where DC's waste has been going. This literally is part of the TV helicopter footage of that incinerator. I had to run the video many times so you can get one where you can even see the smokestack peeking through all the smoke. But that fire lasted 2 weeks, 3 stories of trash burning uncontrolled, with one of the most diverse communities of color in the country, literally next door to that plant. I went there with a gas mask on 2 days into that fire and was talking to people in that neighborhood. And one was just telling me how they had this daughter with asthma, and she's home all day, and there's nowhere she can go, and she can't breathe. I mean, horrible stuff. And this was just a few months after another 2-week fire at another Covanta incinerator in Montgomery County, Maryland, that wasn't as bad as this one, but this company has had so many fires, they actually testified and said that this is becoming more prevalent in the industry. This is how many fires that require emergency response. At this one company, this is the only company bigger than Wheelabrator, so they have about 40 incinerators across the country. That's the newest one they have in the whole country, had 6 fires that required emergency response in just 2 years. Although this is a 5-year history, they all happened in the 2 years before this slide was made. And so I don't know where you rank here, but the fact is they don't know what caused these. They blame lithium-ion batteries because they figure that's probably what's igniting things in the waste stream more often. So don't throw those in the trash, bring them to the household hazardous waste collection, I guess. What's that?
Any biomass will heat up.
Right, or sometimes people throw ashes in the trash too, so sometimes the trash is already on fire or smoldering.
Bacterial.
Yeah, so there are a number of reasons, and they speculate, but they don't know exactly what caused each fire. But this is something you might have to look forward to. Who knows? Now you might say, if they're going to keep running in Hudson Falls, you might at least say, well, Covanta's installed these upgrades to detect fires sooner and try to at least deal with this when it happens better. Are you investing in that here? Why or why not? You can ask those kinds of questions at least. And they probably can't afford to make a lot of investments in a 28-year-old plant that is very tiny. So other ones the same size are already shutting down because they're that small. Okay, so moving on to health impacts. This is a summary of some of the studies that we've seen in terms of the health impacts around trash incinerators. Now, the industry's put out a fact sheet recently, their competitor Covanta did, that says no health studies have found any health effects from living around trash incinerators. And that's interesting because I got these from somewhere, and there are studies that have shown things. But it is hard to show a correlation. Often it's a weak correlation, and that's, like I said earlier, it's hard to show this because there can be other sources, there are people move around, the food moves around, so it's not easy to show the trend, but there's the fact that they have enough studies that have shown anything is telling that there's something to be found. Okay, let's talk about alternatives. So what is zero waste? I have helped work with the Zero Waste International Alliance on defining what zero waste means internationally. These are the folks that set the standards, and they used to just say don't burn or bury. Now they made it more clear as of the latest definition last year that the priority is not burning, because they all knew, and their standards were already there, but they're catching up with their definition now, that the priority is zero burning and getting to at least 90% reduction of waste going to landfills. That's the objective operationally of zero waste. And if you're not for zero waste, one of my colleagues, I love this quote, she says, well, how much waste are you for? So if you think about it, I mean, you start talking about zero waste and public officials say, you're a utopian, you won't ever get to zero. Well, just be real. We have to actually haul the stuff and manage it, so like, you're in fairyland here. And the thing is, if you think about it, we have a lot of policies like this. We have zero drug tolerance, zero accidents in the workplace, zero safety defects. What boss is out there saying, our goal is to injure 5 workers per year? Right? Like, who would do that? They would get left out of the room. But we constantly do that with waste policy and say, well, let's hit 35% recycling and we're cool. So we're saying we're going to waste a certain amount. So the zero waste plans, their goal is to get as close to zero as you can. You don't give up at a certain point. You just keep going further because there's always more that can be done. So this is my personal experiment from 2015. I was inspired by, there was this young woman who made 2 it was like a mason jar of trash in like 2 years. And so I was like, well, I wonder how good I am because I never measured it. So in January, that was all my trash. April, July, and October. I learned from January because I had this.
Oh, there's Mike. Let me just. Waiting for our speaker. Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all tonight. I'm Tracy Frisch. I'm the founder of the Clean Air Action Network, previously known as Greater Glens Falls Wants Clean Air. Same sentiment, but we just thought a simpler name might be in order. And I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight for our first public education program. We were just formed in March, so a month and a half ago. So tonight we have with us Mike Ewald. He is the founder and director of the Philadelphia-based Energy Justice Network, a national network supporting grassroots resistance against dirty energy and waste facilities, notably biomass and waste incinerators, coal and natural gas facilities. He's been active since high school in 1990 and has led winning campaigns stopping numerous incinerators, power plants, landfills, ethanol, biorefineries, a coal-to-oil refinery, a liquefied natural gas import terminal, water fluoridation, a multi-state nuclear waste dump, and more. He has a very impressive record. I met Mike at a Alternatives to Incineration conference in Detroit in the 2000s, and his website is excellent, and if you want resources, they have great resources there. So he's done extensive work to document and expose environmental racism through local organizing campaigns and in demographic and mapping research nationally. He's also done much to critique the false solutions and harmful community impacts within most climate, energy, and waste policies, even carbon taxes, emissions trading schemes, fossil fuel divestment, and renewable portfolio standards. His long-term work against environmental racism in Chester, Pennsylvania earned him a tuition-free law school for activists scholarship to the University of the District of Columbia. So he's also an attorney. Since well before earning a law degree, he's been helping communities stop polluters with local ordinances such as the clean air ordinances he's been using to prevent proposed incinerators and crematoria. He's now working to use these ordinances to force the closure of existing waste incinerators and fossil fuel power plants. His zero waste hierarchy was used as the basis for the global standard set by the Zero Waste International Alliance. Several of us have been speaking to Mike since December when, during the comment period for Lehigh Cement to burn Raggertail, which is plastic, waste plastic and paper. So Mike has been extremely helpful, and it's for that reason I thought it would be great to bring him here. This program is entitled How Dangerous is Glens Falls Air? And it will include some discussion of what other communities are doing to reduce their pollution locally and to make their communities safer for human health. So without further ado, here's Mike, and he's going to do a PowerPoint, and then there will be questions. So if you want to write down your question during his presentation, so you remember, and we'll have time. We'll be here until 8:30. So thanks again for coming. If you have not given us your name and contact information, we'd really like to get that. That will allow us to communicate with you after the event. So during the program, I'll circulate a sign-in sheet on a clipboard, and you can put more information if you haven't. Thanks very much, and here's Mike.
Great.
Yep.
All right, hi everyone. It's great to be here. First time in Glens Falls. Thank you for welcoming me. Yeah, Tracy's been great to work with. She reached out to me when I've been working with folks a little further south in Albany County. God, this cord's not very long, is it? And yes, I'm glad to be working with folks in this community because when I got started, I was still in high school. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and Wheelbrader, a familiar name here, was the first company I ever fought. Wheelbrader is a trash incinerator company, and they're also here in Hudson Falls and near here. So my life goal is to shut all the incinerators down in this country. I think we're going to pull that off. And there are 3 Wheelbrader incinerators and a now proposed Wheelbrader incinerator ash dump along the Hudson, and we're going to have to work on getting all those closed down. So you're in good company in that you have new folks that are newly looking to organize community groups in Poughkeepsie and Peekskill as well, where there are existing Wheelbrader trash incinerators. They also want to see them shut down. And the folks in Catskill fighting the ash dump that Wheelbrader wants to build to take the ash from here are also folks who will be happy to work in solidarity with you here. So we're all on one team. So I'm going to walk you through. I have a lot of slides here. Some of them I might breeze through, go a little fast. Slow me down if you need to. I do talk fast, so be warned. And definitely save up all your questions, write them down. Sometimes I'll take questions throughout. If it's like, ooh, it has to be asked now, I'll entertain some of that, but if it gets out of control, I might put a pause on that because we'll never get through all the slides. So anyway, with that said, thank you for the lengthy introduction. Tracy, where'd you go, Tracy?
Oh, right.
Oh, hi. And we'll just start moving through this. So thanks everyone for welcoming me here. So you probably recognize some of these smokestacks. Glens Falls area does seem to have an air pollution problem from the numbers I've been looking at, and that problem has 3 names attached to it and 3 sets of smokestacks attached to it. So this is a lot to absorb in one thing, but I put this together and I'm going to try to walk you through this because some people were saying, well, shouldn't we study this more? Do we know enough? Where's the air pollution really coming from? Well, we already have the answers. This is from Environmental Protection Agency. This is not perfect data. There are gaps in this data. I won't get into that. But this is the best data that exists on where air pollution is coming from. And you'll see on here, so the number, this is the one slide, I probably do need that laser pointer someone was offering me. If you do want to pass that up, that would be a good time for this. So on the top row, you see industry. So those are all the pounds of different pollutants coming from industrial sources in the two counties, in Washington and Warren County. You also see on-road, so those are the cars and trucks. Non-road is another set of mobile sources. So these are tractors, things that are on the construction vehicles, stuff on the sides of roads, or not really on the road, but they're still mobile sources. And these are cool, especially if you have animals. Okay. So the non-point, that is point sources is what they usually call, I'll just rename it industry because that's what it really tends to be. But non-point are things like buildings, home and commercial buildings, heating systems for the most part. And so usually those are pretty big sources. And usually we just look at the industry data and then the industry will come back and say, well, cars and trucks are so much worse. Why aren't you focusing on them? And, sorry, well, baby didn't like that voice. And so I decided we should look at all of it, just to be fully comprehensive here. Let's look at all of it. And in this area, perhaps because it's not as urban as other areas, the industry really jumps out. So the industrial share of pollution for all these things is actually pretty high. For some, it's as high as 97% of the lead is from industry. 91% of hydrochloric acid, 91% of the cancer-causing chromium-6 is from industry. And the share of industries, like you have 22 industrial facilities between the counties that are listed in this EPA data. And Finch Paper jumps out as the largest source. Lehigh Cement and Wheelwright's trash incinerators, the second, third largest sources. All the other industry combined is a very small portion of all the air pollution you're seeing between the two counties. Those big three companies, this is including all sources. So we're looking at 85% of hydrochloric acid from all sources, including cars and trucks and home heating systems and commercial buildings. 85% is from these three companies. 78% of the sulfur dioxide, which causes respiratory problems, acid rain, heart attacks and strokes, 78% from three companies. So this is huge. 50% of the arsenic, 58% of the lead, this is 83% of the mercury. So to think that we don't have enough answers already to take action would be silly, because when you have data like this, even though there are some gaps in it, even though the gaps are actually ones where the industry numbers are probably higher than what I'm showing you here, and I'll explain later why that is. But there's no reason not to act based on having this information already. And so that's why we put this slide together. So I understand some of the community have been talking about, well, why don't we study this more? Why don't we get air monitors? Well, one reason is that we don't need another study to tell us what is already in our face. And there's this data that is already EPA data that's been out for several years. We also should not be studying something when we have enough evidence to act. Studies are great, but studies don't fix the problem. Studies just give you more information. More information is always helpful, but we don't need more information to be able to act on what we can clearly see as a trend. Now, in cigarette smoking, it was decades before they knew exactly how cigarette smoke caused cancer. Decades before they knew that mechanism, the Surgeon General put warnings on cigarettes because there were enough dead bodies that had lined up that they can see that there's a trend here. There was enough evidence that even though they didn't know how it happened, they knew, well, we need to do what's called the precautionary principle. We have enough evidence of harm that we should take action, even though we don't have certainty. That's what the precautionary principle means. And so thousands, tens and probably hundreds, maybe millions of people's lives have been saved because they took action to warn people before they knew exactly what was going on. So I think we know enough to act already. Now the big three, Finch paper, paper mill is 55% of, this is just of the industrial share now of the pollution. This is if all pounds are equal. Now we know all pounds are not equal. 1 pound of mercury is huge, whereas 1 pound of nitrogen oxide is not going to do much damage. It's usually in big numbers. But if you just add it all up in order to get a big picture, all the pounds of pollution from industry between these two counties, 55% of that pollution from those 22 companies is Finch paper's pollution. 28% is the Lehigh cement kiln, and 7% is the Wheelwright Hudson Falls trash incinerator. It's a sort of a small trash incinerator compared to most. And 19 other industrial facilities combined total 9%. All right, so we're going to focus a lot of this presentation on trash incineration. And you might think, well, didn't Mike just say that these other things are much bigger? Why are we focusing on trash incineration? Well, part of the reason is that there are ready alternatives. This is an old facility that is likely to shut down soon anyway, and it's the most winnable. It's not like it's unreasonable to think that you should be looking for alternatives to this and shutting it down soon, like other communities are doing. There are not that many jobs there. With paper mills, with cement kilns, you still have the issue of, well, maybe the product is still needed. Now, there is a huge paper mill in Maryland that just closed because there's not a demand for the product. So you might see large facilities like that close on their own. But no one in this community that I've heard from so far is campaigning to close down Finch paper or to close down Lehigh cement. The issue is more one of, should they be burning waste or should they be burning conventional fuels? And that's a battle you may want to engage in, as many other communities are doing. But the incinerator is something that there's a very clear case for why that should be simply closed down. And I want to make that case to you in this presentation. And we'll talk a little about the other facilities, but we'll mostly be focusing on trash incineration here. And that website there is where you can get a lot more information. You can get an older version of this PowerPoint that has not the local specific slides, but a lot of the other content and a lot of other resources you'll find on that page. All right, so this is a map of where the trash incinerators are in the US. Do you see a trend? Yeah, so I'm usually living in this part of the cluster or this part of the cluster. I'm kind of back and forth a lot, but this here is the priority to get all these out of here. Florida's got the most incinerators of any state, but New York is second with 10 trash incinerators in New York State. So that's a lot. It's a lot for one place to have. It's unusual to have trash incinerators. Most of the country, most of the world doesn't use trash incinerators, but we've been sold a bill of goods many years ago. A lot of gullible community leaders went for it, thinking that this was a solution, and now we're stuck with these antiquated, very polluting machines. The good news is that a lot of these have been shutting down, partially because of activism, partially because just their own economic weight they're crumbling under. And so I keep having to update this slide and take markers off of it, which is a wonderful thing. So I think 2 of them are on the slide that already need to be removed. Detroit and one in New York just shut down in the past month. So that's not accounted for in this slide yet either, I don't think. But there are about 72 trash incinerators now, if we count those latest closures. You'll see there was a peak of about 180, almost 190 around 1991, and the numbers keep falling. They have not managed to build a new trash incinerator at a new location in this country since 1995. They did build one new one next to an existing one in Florida in recent years and rebuilt and expanded some, but community opposition to this industry is so intense. Anywhere they try to go, people fight them because it's one of the most unpopular technologies in the world. It's up there with nuclear power in terms of if you try to build it in any community, people will figure out this is something that they don't want and they will fight it off. So let's look at the lifespan of incinerators, because yours is right at the prime here. Most of them don't make it past 30 years. The industry I've seen brag recently, oh, well, these can last 40 years. There's one in Saugus, Massachusetts that's 45 years old. And that's true. It's had holes in the roof and had to be repaired a lot. And there's one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania that also had to be completely rebuilt in order to survive past his 40th birthday. But for the most part, they don't make it much past their 30s. And this one's already 28 years old. That's the average lifetime of when I last put the slide together. It was 76 still operating in the country, and the average lifetime of them was 28 years old. So this is already at the point at which they tend to be closing. The ones that have been closing since 2000, their average lifetime is only 21 years old. So it's at the point where it's not worth investing in keeping this machine going when it's going to keep getting more expensive and falling apart, as a lot of them are doing. All right, now I like that this slide is not readable. This is just a list of victories in about a 5-year span of groups within our energy justice network that were defeating proposals for trash incinerators, poultry waste, wood incinerators, other types of dirty energy and waste facilities that are incinerators of some sort. And there were about 40 defeated just in that span of about 5 years. I haven't kept as good track since then, so I'll have to update this slide at some point, but that trend has definitely continued. And some more encouragement here is that when I looked at just ballpark numbers here, going back to the 70s, of different waves of industrial development, and here, I'll just play this time. Fun stuff. Here we go. So since the 70s, they were trying to build, Nixon talked about 1,000 nuclear reactors by year 2000. They got 116 of them built, and now they're in the 90s. And if you look at each of these waves of development, you see they tried to build something on the order of 1,000 trash incinerators. It's hard to get good numbers on that. But they only got up to nearly 200, and now this green bar, the number still operating is even shorter. And industry by industry, you see this. So a lot of times people think, well, grassroots community groups, NIMBY groups, not in my backyard groups, they're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're just pushing things to more vulnerable communities when they stop there, and that is not true. What we're actually doing is we're turning grassroots community groups, like the one forming here, into not in anyone's backyard groups, NIABI, because we get it. We understand that it's not simply we push it out of here and some poor black community gets stuck with it. No, we work with that community too, and we make sure that technologies that aren't good enough for our community don't end up anywhere. And that's what we're doing, industry by industry. We see entire sectors of dirty energy and dirty waste facilities that are proposed, and between 50 and high 99% of them, in the case of trash incinerators, is the 99%, are defeated one community at a time. Because groups like your own get together, fight them off, and support other communities to do the same. It's not big groups that you get mailings from and write checks to NRDC and such that are lobbying in DC, changing rules. That's not how it's happening. It's groups like Clean Air Action Network that are fighting one community at a time, but working with us and others to support that are making dents in entire industries, shifting entire industries. It's huge. And there's just not an appreciation of that, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, so the names they use for incinerators, you'll notice that there's a language battle that goes on in this thing. And I know I've been talking to the reporter about that here, and others, often the industry is pushing back and saying, well, these are waste to energy facilities, or now in some cases they call them energy from waste facilities. And when I first got involved, about 30 years ago, they called it trash to steam. I thought it was a good thing. Who wouldn't want to turn trash into steam? I mean, steam is just, like you go in the shower and you have steam, and you can breathe that, it's fine. And we're not just throwing ice cubes in the trash can though, so that's not actually what's coming out of the smokestack. But when I read about it in the newspaper, I thought, well, that must be a good thing. And I didn't know any better. I was in high school, there was no internet yet, I didn't have a way of knowing otherwise. But they use these terms to confuse you on purpose. They're misleading on purpose. No one's turning trash into energy. That violates the laws of physics. But they use that to make you think that you can turn bad things into good things and not into worse things, which is what they're doing. So there are other names for different types as well. We don't have to get into all those because you're not facing them here right now. But let's drill into these. So trash to steam is not what's happening, because it's not just water vapor that comes out of incinerator smokestacks. So I call them trash to toxic ash and toxic air emissions facilities, because that's honestly what they are. They turn, for every 100 tons of trash you burn, you get about 70 tons of air pollution. You're basically landfilling in your lungs, the air we breathe. And the other 30 tons become toxic ash, which still has to go to a landfill. It doesn't disappear. It's not an alternative to landfills. You just get smaller, more toxic landfills. They're not waste to energy either. We call them waste of energy facilities, actually, because if you take the same materials you're putting in them, which are mostly compostable and recyclable materials, and you actually compost and recycle them, you save 3 to 5 times more energy than you can get back by burning it. And where's paper? Can I get a piece of paper? Represent visuals here. Great. Blinding myself. So this paper, to make this piece of paper, you have to cut down trees using fossil fuel chainsaws or machines. You have to ship them to a paper mill and burn whatever finished paper might be burning to power that mill. I'm not sure, but often fossil fuels, sometimes tires. And then you have to ship it to a staple store somewhere to market it. And all the energy that came out of tailpipes and smokestacks is not physically present in the paper anymore. It's called embodied energy. It's the energy it took to get to here. You can't get that energy back by burning it because it's not in here. But if you burn it, you have to go through all those steps again and recreate it. Whereas if you recycle it, you can short circuit that. You can skip a lot of those steps and save that energy. And that's why we call them waste of energy facilities, because we'd rather save that energy and do the right thing. Okay, so I kept this slide in because it's related to the Wheelbrader company. So Waste Management, when I first got involved, they owned Wheelbrader, and Waste Management is the biggest waste corporation in the world. Wheelbrader is the second largest incinerator company in the country, and they were sold off in 2014. They actually got sold again just a few months ago. So not sure why they keep getting sold, but maybe it's because they're not so profitable. But Waste Management, the biggest waste company in the world, started realizing, apparently in 2014, that this is not a profitable industry to be in, and they moved away from other incinerator-like investment opportunities they have as well. Sold them all off. Except for the trash burning and cement kilns thing. That loopy idea of theirs still makes economic sense to them, so watch out for that. I mention that because there are actually threats in this region. So what brought me to this region of New York was when Connecticut first reached out to me. We have a member group in Hartford, Connecticut called the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. And they've been fighting a trash incinerator that's the biggest polluter in their city for many years. And it's very old, and it's literally falling apart. This past year, they just shut it completely down because both of its generators failed. And so they were looking, the state of Connecticut, which is a state-run plant, they were looking at alternatives, and one of the main alternatives they wanted to do that was being seriously considered was to ship it to Albany County, New York, and burn it in a cement kiln at Lafarge. And that's what brought me to Albany County. And as some of you may know, Albany County read a majority of their legislature over the Christmas holidays in 2017, and a majority of the local town board in the town of Queens, and a majority of the Village of Bravina officials all went on record within that Christmas holiday time. They took time away from their families and they signed things and said, no, hell, way, got that backwards, no way in hell. They basically said to Connecticut, we're not doing this. And they put it in writing, and they had press conferences that made a big deal about it. And the company backed off right away. And they put ads in the paper and they said, no, we were never thinking of doing this. Of course, their name was written in a proposal that got erased from later in Connecticut, but it was in writing that they were trying to burn trash in New York from 70 Connecticut towns for years to come. The cement industry is moving in this direction, and the waste industry is moving in this direction too, because they know that they can't get new incinerators built. They know that people are fighting them. They know no one likes landfills either. And cement plants, well, they don't like paying for fuels if they can get paid to take waste. And so that's what Lafarge was looking at. Later, Lafarge was saying, well, we don't want to burn trash. We really want to burn tires. And they got super excited about burning tires, and they had a state permit for this, and they really pushed hard, and the local government said, hell with that. And they hired me to write a clean air law that they passed in March. And that law effectively bans Lafarge from burning any kind of biomass or waste. And so this is a precedent, the first one in New York, to where local government actually drew the line and said, we're going to use the powers we're given under state and federal law to set a higher bar in terms of protecting air quality. And they did that, and now the company's trying to take over the town in the elections, and we'll see about that, but that's their next step. So not far from there, in Rensselaer, there's a company now that wants to take trash from the Albany region and compost it, they're saying, but really turn it into pellets to then market to cement kilns to burn. In this case, the ones in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, instead of just going across the river to Lafarge, because that's not allowed anymore. Now, if I'm in my home state of Pennsylvania, effective in stopping the cement kilns there from taking this trash, don't be surprised if they go even closer to home and say, hey, Glens Falls area, we got a cement kiln here, why don't we burn trash here? That's their business model. So you can easily be next. You can be part of their business model. We just don't know about it because maybe it just wasn't in that news article. So keep an eye on that. All right, moving on. So the basic lessons with incineration. I call it garbage in, garbage out, and not just in the literal sense, but if you put mercury in an incinerator, every bit of that comes out. If you put chlorine atoms in an incinerator, every bit of that comes out. It comes out in a combination of the air and the ash. It doesn't turn into energy, it doesn't magically disappear. It comes out into the environment that we're living and breathing in. And so don't think that there's magic going on, even though they have pollution control devices. All that does is take some of the crud out of the air and put it into the ash, making the ash more toxic. Now, nothing is 100% either. So when they say, well, we're capturing 90 whatever percent of a certain pollutant, well, it's never 100%. And small amounts matter. So if it's a small percentage of a big number of many, many tons per day they're burning, it's what, 500 ton per day plant, then it doesn't take much mercury to be damaging the brains of infants, to be making fish too toxic to eat. The amount of mercury they put out is enough to make sure that the fish in this region are too toxic to be safe to eat. Many, many times over. Actually, there's a study from Minnesota that's highly cited that says that if 1 gram of mercury is deposited over a 20-acre lake each year, then that's enough to keep the fish so toxic you can't eat them. The amount of mercury coming out of these 3 plants combined is 53 pounds a year. That's 24,000 grams. That's 24,000 20-acre lakes of fish you can't eat, coming from the 3 facilities in this area. So when they say, we have pollution controls that take out the mercury, this is after that. So don't buy it. Now, I'll skip over some of these last points here. Cover some of this. All right. So I've been making the claim that trash incineration is the most expensive and polluting way to manage waste or to make energy. The industry's own mouthpiece has admitted on the record that I'm right on half of those points. In 2013, Ted Michaels, who is the president of the Trade Association for Trash Incinerators, we were sitting at the same table before Washington, D.C. City Council when they were considering building an incinerator, which we stopped. And this is a direct quote. I watched the video many times to get it exact. And he calls it waste energy, of course. But he's basically saying here, yes, if you have an incinerator near a landfill, the landfill is going to be cheaper. This is true across the country. This is not even disputed. There's another industry trade association, the Solid Waste Management Association, that has looked at this as well, and they found across the country that tipping fees at incinerators are consistently higher than those at landfills. So this doesn't make economic sense. No one's doing this because it makes financial sense. So we can end that discussion because if the 2 industry trade associations admit it, then there's not much of debate. Now, on energy, they love to say they're energy facilities, not waste facilities. Well, if they're energy facilities, we think, well, what's the best way to make energy, or electricity in this case? No one thinks trash incinerators. And this is why. This is the federal government's data on the cost of different types of energy. And whether you're looking at the cost to build or the cost to operate and maintain it, trash incineration is the most expensive way to do either one. So no one thinks we need power, let's burn trash. That's not how it works. They're building them for other reasons. But what's most amazing about this is that it shows the difference between energy and waste. Fuels and waste. A fuel is something you pay to get, whereas a waste is something you get paid to take. Now, trash incinerators, their fuel is waste. They get paid per ton to take trash. And yet their operation and maintenance costs are still.
For example, we don't have anything like that around here necessarily, but.
Well, you have the wheelbarrow plant, that's the same
Wheelbarrow.
exact
I
technology.
thought that was maybe different, bigger than what you were wheelbarrow, but regardless, why couldn't the government or someone shut that plant down after having these massive fires, so many in a few short years? Dangerous, people, why are they still there?
Because the government is not inclined to shut industries down. That's not what they see their job as, and that's not what the regulations and laws are designed to do.
So let's just take that as an example. Let's say there were a dozen people or 100 people in that area that decided to do a lawsuit for millions or billions against this plant. Would that close them down?
Probably not. Because, first of all, you go into a court of law and they say, well, okay, prove that X caused Y.
And you can't.
You can't. It's
Well,
very,
I'm
very
talking
difficult.
about the actual fires that, you know.
Okay, but fires aren't on purpose. It's not intentional. So where's the law being broken, right? You can say it's negligence, maybe get some money out of it, but they'll still be operating.
Right now, our waste control people if you recycle, they mix it all together, they dump it in the ground.
There needs to be accountability around that, for sure. There's a hand over here, Ken.
Do you know the story behind how they have closed down some of the other trash incinerators in these other communities? How were they able to do that?
Some of the ones we're working on right now, like in Philadelphia, Tracy knows I've been very busy this past week or two, because we're trying to stop the next 7 years of where Philadelphia's waste goes from being a contract that's with any incinerator or cement kiln, so we're using a bit of both. So we're trying to cut off the worst options while the city talks about zero waste, which we need to get them to be more serious about too. So some could be won by stopping their contracts to get waste. Some were shut down because their energy contracts expired and they can't compete with natural gas. Or they lost a steam customer, like in the one in Utah that shut down a few years ago. The Army stopped buying their steam and they couldn't afford to keep going. One in Maryland shut down also because of the Army, because they wanted their land back and they were leasing the land to them, so they shut down that way. So a lot of them are shutting down without activism even doing it, but some are because of deliberate efforts that communities are doing, especially the stuff that we're focusing on, like these local clean air laws. So local regulation or attacking their economic streams. One of the ones in New Hampshire that shut down blamed their their failure to even get in the first place renewable energy credits for their energy, because they're so small and similar size to this one that they can't operate cost effectively, and so they need these extra subsidies to stay alive. California and one closed a year ago for the same reasons.
I live in the South Glens Falls, it's Saratoga County, and we take our own trash to the landfill. We have to pay a certain amount per bag. I got the impression that this is unusual.
Yes.
Well, at transfer stations, it might be normal, some transfer stations.
Yeah, it's more unusual at the curb.
I see.
But there are 10,000 communities doing it. I think 4 whole states doing it.
In my community, we have 5 different garbage trucks that drive around.
Oh, yeah.
We have 5 companies that collect garbage on the street.
Yeah, and some
And
in
all
the
their trucks drive down the same
same
streets.
company,
5
different days.
Yeah, there is a solution for that, and we don't necessarily want to endorse. Well, the ideal solution would be municipal things. We allow so many sectors of our economy to be privatized, which actually costs us all more, like healthcare. We pay so much more than other countries that have universal healthcare. Just having one municipally run trash company, there's just a government trash truck, that you don't have to have 5 companies running down the same street all the time. But if you are not going to put it in the public sector, some places like New York City, they franchise it. So they break up the area into different districts, and they'll just let companies compete for contracts and say, okay, you won the contract for District 1, you won the contract for District 2, and that way you don't have 5 companies on the same street.
It still doesn't mean they're gonna recycle.
What's that?
It still doesn't mean they're gonna recycle.
Yeah,
No,
anytime.
I know.
We have to tell them that we want recycling.
A municipality actually could give those, if it's still privatized, they could award the contracts based on their environmental record. How much they recycle, whether they're willing, whether they compost or anaerobically digest things. and such like that. It does not have to just be based on, other criteria. It could be based on, environmental criteria, and it's possible for people to put pressure on the community towards that end, rather than to just, we don't have to just sit and let things happen the way they're happening. We can put some pressure towards higher goals.
Tracy, when do you have a meeting for people to actually sign up for doing things, or to tell us what's going to go on next or whatever?
I don't know
Okay.
what we're gonna
Master
do, but
plan.
if you signed
Right,
in,
right.
we'll communicate with you.
And what was the date again of the other, next speaker?
It's June 10th. We had a
Okay.
flyer made, but we weren't clear whether Crandall Library someone said they would co-sponsor it, but we didn't have that clarity yet, so we didn't want to put out the flyer with incorrect information.
Okay.
So that flyer will go out to everyone who signed in.
Okay.
And it will also be in the newspaper, we hope.
And if you are signing up on the mailing list, please print clearly, because last time we couldn't put some people down because we just couldn't decipher what they were writing.
Yeah, a lot of us don't get the post-on.
Right, well,
So,
then-
is it
then-
in the Chronicle?
the Post-Star has been much more friendly towards us.
Okay, well,
The
let's
Chron-
try
but
again.
if you don't get the Post-Star, you could A, read it in the library or
No.
online, or B,
Or Facebook
sign up,
page.
because we will do multiple notices to
Okay.
people who are on our list.
There's
Email.
the Facebook page.
Yes, we have a Facebook page
Peter,
that we're gonna
actually-
be working on some more, but if you're not electronic, there's a couple people here who only have phone, and we do call them at this point, as long as there aren't too many people like that. So thanks, everyone, for coming, and
You can come up and ask me questions.